Welcome to the Stoic Storyteller, your sanctuary for raw, unfiltered stories about the darker side of human nature. Here, we dive deep into the reality of life, the toxic relationships, the bitter betrayals, and the quiet, calculating art of absolute justice.
Have you ever given someone everything, only for them to throw you into the gutter? Today, we follow a brilliant man whose fiancée and best friend stole his billion-dollar empire. They thought they left him with absolutely nothing. They didn't in Appos. Tino. He secretly held the detonator to their entire world. Prepare yourself for a story of ultimate karma. Let and Appos S begin. I didn't in Appos. T grow up with trust funds, summer houses, or safety nets. I grew up in the sprawling, merciless foster care system of Chicago. My name is Elias Thorne. By the time I was 18, I had lived in 12 different homes, learning early on that the only thing you can truly rely on in this world is your own mind. And my mind was a fortress. I possessed a rare, obsessive intellect for biomedical engineering. When my biological mother died of an undetected, late-stage heart arrhythmia because she couldn't and Appos afford premium healthcare, I made a silent vow over her unmarked grave. I swore I would create something that would make preventative diagnostics so cheap and accessible that no one would ever die in the dark again. For 10 agonizing years through college and a grueling PhD program, I sacrificed everything. I didn't in Appos. Tea party, I barely slept, and I survived on instant noodles and black coffee. My obsession culminated in a revolutionary invention I called the Aegis Protocol, a microscopic, non-invasive biosensor patch. It could instantly detect early markers for strokes, heart attacks, and aggressive cancers with 99% accuracy, sending the data directly to a smartphone. It was Appos just a medical breakthrough. It was a trillion-dollar disruption to the entire global healthcare industry. But a brilliant mind is often socially naive. Because I had spent my entire life starved for genuine human connection, I was desperately vulnerable to anyone who offered me the illusion of family. That was my fatal flaw, and it was exactly what they exploited. I couldn't in Appos build a corporate empire from a university basement by myself. I needed capital and I needed charm. Enter Nathaniel Sterling. Nathaniel was everything I was not. He was the quintessential Ivy League golden boy, born into massive generational wealth. He wore tailored Italian suits, had a smile that could disarm a hostile boardroom, and possessed a terrifyingly ruthless business acumen. We met in graduate school, and he immediately saw the explosive financial potential in my prototype. He became my co-founder, my shield against corporate sharks, and my absolute best friend. I trusted him with my life, but Nathaniel wasn't in Appos the only person I let past my walls. Sarah was a junior marketing executive Nathaniel had brought in to help pitch our startup to venture capitalists. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with warm emerald eyes and an aura of absolute, nurturing kindness. Where Nathaniel handled the cutthroat business, Sarah handled me. She reminded me to eat. She rubbed my shoulders when I fell asleep at my lab desk, and she listened to my traumatic childhood stories with tears in her eyes. I fell in love with a blinding, desperate intensity. Within a year, I proposed to her with a modest diamond ring, promising her that once Aegis went public, I would give her the world. She wept, said yes, and moved into my cramped apartment. I thought I had finally beaten the odds. I had the ultimate medical breakthrough, a brother in arms, and the love of a spectacular woman. I was blind to the fact that I had invited two highly sophisticated predators into my sanctuary. As we neared the final stages of FDA approval, the pressure became unimaginable. The Aegis Protocol was valued at roughly $2 billion before we even hit the public market. Major pharmaceutical companies were terrified of us, and venture capitalists were throwing blank checks at Nathaniel's feet. I was working 120-hour weeks. I lived in the laboratory, fueled entirely by adrenaline and caffeine pills. My physical health was deteriorating rapidly. I lost 15 pounds, my hands constantly trembled, and my vision blurred from staring at microscopic code sequences. Because I was completely consumed by the science, I handed total control of the legal and financial architecture to Nathaniel and Sarah. You just focus on crossing the finish line, Eli, Nathaniel would say, slapping my back with his heavy, reassuring hand. Sarah and I will handle the corporate red tape. You and Oppos. Re the genius, I and Oppos. M just the janitor. Sarah became the courier. During my exhausted, semi-lucid states at 3 a.m., she would bring me hot tea and thick stacks of corporate documents. Just routine patent filings. Baby, Sarah would whisper soothingly, kissing my cheek as she placed a pen in my trembling hand. Nathaniel needs these to secure our final round of funding. Just sign the tabs. Then you can finally get some sleep. I didn't in Oppos. T read them. I was too tired, and I loved her too much to doubt her. I signed page after page, completely unaware that I was systematically signing away my founder in Oppos. Equity, my voting rights, and the core patents of my own life's work. I was building my own guillotine, and the woman I loved was handing me the nails. A forensic mind cannot be entirely suppressed, even by exhaustion. As the massive launch day approached, tiny, microscopic inconsistencies began to bleed through their perfect facade. It started with the cologne. Nathaniel wore a highly distinct, custom-blended Tom Ford cologne. A heavy, intoxicating mix of cedar and vanilla. One Sunday morning, after Sarah had supposedly spent the weekend visiting her sick mother in upstate New York, she returned to our apartment to pack her gym bag. As I hugged her from behind, burying my face in her hair, my lungs filled with the unmistakable, heavy scent of cedar and vanilla. I froze. You smell different, I murmured, my heart suddenly skipping a beat. Sarah tensed. It was barely perceptible, a millimeter shift in her spine. Oh, she laughed smoothly, stepping out of my embrace. My mother spilled some terrible potpourri in her guest room. I had to douse myself in cheap perfume to cover it up. It was a lie. My brain registered it instantly, but my heart violently rejected it. Then came the corporate anomalies. I accidentally logged into the company's shared cloud server from an old laptop and saw a restricted folder titled Project Phoenix. When I clicked on it, access was denied by an encryption key belonging to Nathaniel. Why would my co-founder lock me out of a project in my own company? When I casually brought it up to Nathaniel later that afternoon, his charismatic smile faltered for a fraction of a second. It in Oppos. It's just a dummy folder for a tax audit, Eli. Stop looking at the servers and get back to the lab. We have the biggest presentation of our lives on Friday. I nodded, pretending to accept his answer. But the orphan in me, the boy who had survived the streets by sensing danger before it arrived, woke up. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I realized I was entirely surrounded in the dark. It was Thursday night, 12 hours before the official press conference where we would unveil the Aegis Protocol to the world and announce our massive initial public offering, IPO. Nathaniel had rented out a private, ultra-exclusive dining room at a 5-star restaurant to celebrate. It was just the three of us. Champagne flowed freely. Nathaniel proposed toast after toast to my genius, raising his crystal glass and looking at me with what I thought was brotherly pride. Sarah sat beside me, her hand resting on my thigh. She wore a stunning black silk dress bought with company funds. But the atmosphere felt suffocating. Beneath the laughter and the clinking glasses, there was a dense, terrifying tension. I watched them closely. I noticed how Nathaniel's eyes would briefly dart to Sarah when he thought I was an Oppos. Looking. I noticed the microscopic smirk playing on Sarah's lips when Nathaniel spoke about the company and Oppos' future leadership. They weren't an Oppos. Looking at a friend or a fiancé. They were looking at a mark. They were looking at a ghost. To Elias, Nathaniel said, raising his final glass of the night, the man who built the foundation, you and Oppos, given us everything we need. Your part is finally done. The phrasing was bizarre. Your part is finally done. I couldn't and Oppos. Have done it without you too, I replied, forcing a smile, though a cold dread was pooling in my stomach. Sarah leaned in and kissed me deeply on the lips. It was a passionate, lingering kiss. Get a good night and Oppos. Sleep, baby, she whispered against my mouth. Tomorrow changes everything. It was the kiss of Judas. I went home alone to our apartment to rest, while Sarah claimed she had to stay late at the office to finalize the press kits. But I didn't in Oppos. Sleep. The dread in my chest had metastasized into absolute terror. 2 a.m., my phone rang. It was an automated alert from the company's central security system. My master access key to the laboratory, the key that held the physical prototypes and the final algorithmic codes, had just been permanently revoked. I leaped out of bed, a cold sweat drenching my body. I opened my laptop to check my corporate email. My inbox was gone. My credentials were wiped. The slaughter had begun. I didn't in Oppos. Wait for morning. I grabbed my keys, sprinted down the stairs of my apartment building, and drove like a madman to our corporate headquarters in downtown Chicago. The rain was coming down in sheets, matching the violent, frantic pounding of my heart. When I arrived at the glass-fronted skyscraper, I bypassed the front desk and headed straight for the private executive elevators. I swiped my keycard. A harsh red light flashed. Access denied. Mr. Thorne. I turned around. Standing in the lobby were 3 massive, armed private security contractors. Behind them stood Nathaniel, impeccably dressed in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, looking as relaxed as if he were attending a Sunday brunch. Beside him stood Sarah, wearing a designer trench coat. She wasn't Oppos. Looking at me with the warm, nurturing eyes of a fiancée. She looked at me the way one looks at a stranger begging for change on the street. "What is going on, Nate?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the empty, polished lobby. "The servers are locked. My credentials are gone." Nathaniel sighed, a perfectly practiced look of corporate pity crossing his face. "Elias, I and Oppos. I'm sorry to do this so abruptly, but the board held an emergency vote at midnight. We and Oppos, VE decided to terminate your position as Chief Technology Officer, effective immediately." "The board?" I laughed, a hysterical panic sound. "I am the board. I own 60% of the company. I built the Aegis protocol with my bare hands." Nathaniel stepped forward, pulling a thick legal binder from his briefcase. He opened it and held up a document. "You did own 60%, Eli, before the final funding round. Do you remember the restructuring documents you signed last month? The ones Sarah brought you when you were so focused on the lab work?" The world tilted on its axis. My ears began to ring. I stared at the dense legal text, my eyes locking onto my own exhausted, frantic signature at the bottom of the page. "You signed a complete IP surrender clause and a majority equity dilution," Nathaniel explained, his voice devoid of any human empathy. "You legally transferred the patents to a holding company that I exclusively control. Your shares were diluted to 0.01%. You are no longer a founder, Elias. You are just a disgruntled former employee." "Sarah," I whispered, looking at the woman I was supposed to marry. "You brought me those papers. You told me it was just routine." Sarah finally looked me in the eye. Her beautiful face was entirely cold. "It was just business, Elias. You and Oppos. A brilliant lab rat, but you were not a CEO. You would have tanked the IPO with your naive obsession with making the technology and Oppos affordable. And Oppos, we needed someone who could play the big leagues." She reached into her pocket, pulled out the modest diamond engagement ring I had bought her with my last dime, and dropped it onto the marble floor. It bounced with a sickening, tiny clink. "Security," Nathaniel commanded smoothly, adjusting his expensive tie. "If Mr. Thorne steps onto corporate property again, have him arrested for trespassing." I donned Oppos. Remember the drive home. I operated on pure, blind shock. I stumbled into our apartment, hoping against all reason that this was a nightmare, that I would wake up and find Sarah making coffee in the kitchen. The apartment was utterly destroyed. It wasn't an Oppos robbery. It was a systematic erasure. While I was at the restaurant being toasted by Nathaniel, movers had come in. Every single piece of furniture Sarah had bought, her clothes, her pictures, gone. But it didn't in Oppos. Stopped there. My personal computer, my backup hard drives, my physical lab notebooks spanning 10 years of research. They had taken it all. They wanted to ensure I didn't and Oppos. T have a single scrap of code left to build a competing product. I fell to my knees in the center of the empty living room. As I sat there in the silence, I noticed something kicked under the radiator. It was an old, cracked iPad that Sarah used to use for reading. In their rush to clear the apartment, they had missed it. I crawled over and plugged it in. Because Sarah had never logged out of her iCloud account, her iMessages automatically populated on the screen. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through years of messages. They Warren and Oppos. T just plotting a corporate takeover. They had been together since the very beginning. Nathaniel, 2 years ago, just met the genius. He's brilliant but pathetic. An orphan with mommy issues. You need to play the sweet, caring angel. Hook him in, keep him in the lab. Sarah, ugh, he's so boring, Nate. He talked about biosensors for 3 hours. But whatever it takes to get the billions. I'll make him fall in love. Nathaniel, 6 months ago, he's exhausted. Slip the equity transfer into the pile tonight. Wear that perfume I like when you come to my hotel afterward. I vomited. I crawled to the bathroom and retched until my stomach was empty, violently sickened by the profound, sociopathic depth of their betrayal. Every kiss, every word of comfort, every moment I thought I was finally loved. It was all a meticulously scripted act. They had weaponized my childhood trauma to steal my life and Oppo's work. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in modern legal destruction. I took the iPad and went to the police. They laughed at me. It an Oppo's a civil matter. Kid, the desk sergeant said. You signed the contracts. Get a lawyer. I tried. I went to 5 different corporate law firms in Chicago. But Nathaniel had anticipated this. He had preemptively put the city and Oppo's top 10 litigation firms on retainer, creating a massive conflict of interest that legally barred them from representing me. The few lawyers who would talk to me looked at the contracts and shook their heads. It and Oppo's ironclad. Elias, a weary public defender, told me. They used your own signatures to legally rob you. To fight this, you and Oppo's need millions of dollars in legal fees and a decade in federal court. Do you have millions? I didn't in Oppo's have a dime. I had poured every cent of my meager savings into the early development of Aegis. My bank accounts were frozen, tied to the corporate structure Nathaniel now controlled. 3 days later, the landlord served me an eviction notice. My rent had been paid through the corporate expense account, which Nathaniel had immediately severed. Within 1 week of the press conference, I was sitting on a cold concrete bench in a Chicago subway station. I had a duffel bag with 3 changes of clothes, a cracked iPad, and $0 to my name. I watched the digital billboard across the tracks. It was broadcasting live from the New York Stock Exchange. Nathaniel and Sarah were standing on the balcony, surrounded by cheering Wall Street brokers. Nathaniel rang the opening bell. Massive confetti rained down. The ticker symbol Aegis flashed on the screen, debuting at an astronomical valuation. In a single morning, Nathaniel and Sarah became billionaires. And the man who built their empire was sleeping on a piece of cardboard, shivering in the freezing wind of the subway tunnels. I had hit absolute, terrifying rock bottom. For a month, I was a ghost. I ate at soup kitchens. I slept in homeless shelters, gripping my duffel bag tightly to my chest so it wouldn't Oppo's be stolen. I watched my body waste away, my brilliant mind dulling under the sheer, agonizing weight of survival. They had won. They had flawlessly executed the perfect crime, stepping on my throat to reach the stars. One freezing evening, I was sitting in the back of a public library, using their free computers to stay warm. I pulled up the news. Nathaniel was on the cover of Forbes magazine, hailed as the visionary of modern medicine. Sarah was standing beside him, wearing a diamond necklace that cost more than my entire life in Oppo's earnings. A dark, heavy despair tried to pull me under. I thought about walking to the bridge over the Chicago River and just ending it. But as I stared at the photo of Nathaniel's smug, arrogant face, a different emotion sparked in the darkest corner of my mind. It wasn't an Oppo's sorrow. It was rage. Pure, hyper-focused, scientific rage. Nathaniel was a brilliant businessman, but he wasn't an Oppo's T a coder. Sarah was a master manipulator, but she didn't and Oppos. T understand biomedical engineering. They had stolen the final algorithms. They had the physical prototypes. They had the patents. But I was an orphan who grew up in the system. I had learned early on never to trust anyone completely. Not even my best friend. Not even my fiancée. I closed my eyes, visualizing the millions of lines of base code I had written over 10 years. I remembered the architecture of the Aegis protocol. I had designed the core operating system to be impenetrable to outside hackers. But I had built a backdoor exclusively for the architect. Deep within the firmware, buried under layers of encrypted diagnostic sequences, I had embedded a dormant subroutine. I called it the Genesis flaw. It was a mathematical kill switch. It didn't end Oppos. T exist on the physical servers they stole. It existed as a logic bomb requiring a specific, external sequence of cryptographic pings to activate. They thought they owned the machine. They didn't in Oppos. Tino, I still held the detonator. The despair vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying purpose. I couldn't in Oppos. T just pressed the kill switch now. If I crashed the Aegis protocol today, Nathaniel would claim it was a temporary glitch, use his billions to hire an army of coders to patch it and survive. No, if I was going to destroy them, I had to let them climb to the absolute highest peak of global power. I needed them to secure contracts with the Department of Defense. I needed their technology to be integrated into the global healthcare infrastructure. I needed their entire financial empire to be so utterly dependent on the Aegis code that when it collapsed, it would create a catastrophic financial black hole that would swallow them whole. I walked out of the library, the freezing wind no longer bothering me. I was no longer a victim. I was the architect of their impending doom. To execute a digital assassination of this magnitude, I needed resources. I needed untraceable servers. I needed capital. I walked into a seedy, run-down electronics repair shop in the worst part of the South Side. The owner, an old, suspicious man, looked at my ragged clothes. I need a job, I told him, my voice steady. I can fix any motherboard, crack any encryption, and salvage any dead hard drive you have in the back room in half the time of your best tech. Pay me under the table. Minimum wage. Let me sleep in the storage room. He scoffed and tossed a completely fried, water-damaged MacBook onto the counter. Fix that by closing. Then we and Oppos, LL talk. Took me 20 minutes. That night, I slept on a pile of dusty bubble wrap in the back of the shop. I had a roof. I had access to discarded, untraceable computer parts. And I had a mind that burned with the fury of 1,000 suns. Nathaniel and Sarah thought they had buried a naive scientist in the dirt. They didn't end Oppos. T realized they had planted a seed in a graveyard, and what was about to grow from it would choke the life out of their empire. The Phoenix Protocol had begun. Revenge is not a fiery explosion. It is a freezing, calculated grind. For the first 6 months, I lived like a rat in the walls. By day, I fixed shattered iPhones and fried motherboards for minimum wage at the dingy electronics shop in the South Side. But by night, when the owner locked up and left, the storage room became my sanctuary. I didn't in Oppos. T have the capital to buy high-end servers, so I built a Frankenstein supercomputer. I salvaged processors from discarded gaming rigs, daisy-chained stolen server racks I bought for pennies at scrapyards, and routed my connection through a dozen proxies to mask my IP address. When the machine was finally operational, I didn't in Oppos. T returned to the legitimate tech world. I dove into the darkest depths of the internet. In the dark web, nobody cares if you don an Oppos. T have a degree, a background check, or a clean corporate record. They only care about what you can do. Using the pseudonym Cypher, I began selling my services. I didn't in Oppos. T engage in petty theft or illegal pornography. I focused exclusively on high-level corporate espionage and cybersecurity. I cracked encrypted servers for rival pharmaceutical companies. I found zero-day exploits in banking software and sold the patches to the highest bidder. My mind, previously chained to the noble pursuit of medical advancement, was unleashed into the ruthless world of digital warfare. My reputation in the underground exploded. Within 8 months, Cypher was considered a myth, an untouchable ghost who could bypass any firewall on Earth. I insisted on being paid exclusively in untraceable cryptocurrency. While Nathaniel and Sarah were gracing the covers of Vogue and Time magazine, boasting about their brilliant medical empire, I was sitting on a dusty mattress in a freezing storage room, staring at a crypto wallet that had quietly ballooned to over $40 million. I finally had my war chest. Now I needed to breach the castle. Aegis was growing at a terrifying exponential rate. The FDA had officially approved the biosensor patches, and Nathaniel had secured a multi-billion-dollar contract to supply the U.S. military and the Department of Veterans Affairs. But massive growth brings massive paranoia. Nathaniel knew that the Aegis protocol was the most valuable piece of intellectual property on the planet. He was terrified of Chinese hackers and corporate spies. He fired 3 different chief information security officers in a span of 6 months because he felt their firewalls weren't and Oppos strong enough. He was desperately looking for the best hacker in the world to test his defenses. I gave him exactly what he wanted. Through a labyrinth of encrypted emails and dark web intermediaries, Nathaniel's executive team reached out to Cypher. They offered an astronomical 7-figure consulting fee for me to conduct a blind penetration test on the Aegis mainframe. The irony was exquisitely delicious. Nathaniel was using the money he stole from me to hire me to protect the company he stole from me. I accepted the contract. Over the course of a week, I systematically tore through the Aegis firewalls. But I didn't end Oppos. Just exposed their vulnerabilities. I patched them. I made their servers genuinely impenetrable to outside threats. Nathaniel was ecstatic. He paid the fee without hesitation, praising Cypher as a digital god. But what Nathaniel didn't end Oppos was that while I was patching the external walls, I was quietly embedding dozens of invisible, encrypted backdoors deep within the internal framework. I now had absolute, unrestricted access to every email, every financial ledger, every microphone, and every webcam in the entire Aegis corporate structure. I was officially inside the walls. With my backdoors firmly in place, I turned my attention to the personal lives of my betrayers. Nathaniel and Sarah had purchased a $40 million mega mansion in the Hollywood Hills, heavily equipped with smart home technology. Every camera, every smart speaker, every automated lock was connected to the same network I now secretly controlled. For weeks, I sat in the dark glow of my monitors, watching them live the life that was supposed to be mine. But the reality of their paradise was far uglier than the magazine covers suggested. Stolen wealth is a poison that eventually rots the soul. Because their entire relationship was built on a foundation of sociopathic deceit, they inherently could not trust each other. Through their bedroom webcams and living room microphones, I watched their paranoia manifest. Nathaniel drank heavily. He was constantly stressed, screaming at his board of directors over the phone. He had also developed a nasty habit of inviting high-end escorts to luxury hotels when Sarah was out of town. Sarah, meanwhile, was and Oppos the devoted, loving partner she pretended to be. I intercepted her private financial routing numbers. She was secretly siphoning millions of dollars from Nathaniel's personal accounts and moving the money into offshore trusts under her mother and Oppos' maiden name. She knew Nathaniel was a snake, and she was building an exit strategy just in case he ever turned on her. They were 2 scorpions trapped in a golden jar. I didn't in Oppos need to destroy their relationship. I just needed to turn up the heat and watch them sting each other. Financial destruction is the only language people like Nathaniel understand. I didn't in Oppos just want to take my company back. I wanted to ensure they walked away with absolutely zero. Aegis was a publicly traded juggernaut. Its stock price was incredibly inflated, hovering near its all-time high. Using my $40 million dark web fortune, I began setting up a complex, global network of shell companies in jurisdictions that didn't in Oppos comply with U.S. federal subpoenas, the Cayman Islands, Seychelles, and Switzerland. Through these ghost entities, I began aggressively buying put options and taking massive short positions against Aegis stock. In layman and Oppos' terms, I was betting tens of millions of dollars that the value of Aegis would experience a catastrophic, unprecedented collapse. It was a highly risky financial maneuver. If Aegis stock continued to rise, my entire fortune would be wiped out. But if the stock crashed, my short positions would trigger a massive financial avalanche. The billions of dollars erased from Nathaniel and Sarah and Apos' net worth would be directly absorbed into my offshore accounts. I was building a financial vacuum cleaner, positioning it directly over their bank accounts. My brokers thought I was insane. Aegis was considered the safest blue-chip medical stock on Wall Street. Nobody in their right mind would bet against it. But nobody else knew about the Genesis flaw. Nobody else knew that the foundation of the multi-billion-dollar Aegis empire was about to turn to sand. The perfect moment finally arrived. It was a Tuesday morning. Nathaniel had orchestrated a globally televised press conference from the Aegis headquarters in Chicago. Major news networks were broadcasting live. The room was packed with hundreds of journalists, military generals, and Wall Street analysts. Nathaniel stepped up to the podium, looking like a god. Sarah stood in the front row, clapping elegantly, wearing a dress that cost more than a house. Today, we are not just announcing a product. Nathaniel boomed into the microphone, his charismatic voice echoing across the globe. We are announcing the Apex upgrade. By midnight tonight, every single Aegis biosensor currently deployed in the United States, in hospitals, in military bases, in civilian homes, will receive an over-the-air firmware update. This update will officially integrate our technology into the National Emergency Response Grid. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. The stock ticker at the bottom of the television screen showed Aegis shares surging another 12%. Nathaniel was flying higher than any CEO in history. He believed he was untouchable. He believed he had successfully stolen fire from the gods and secured his legacy forever. I sat in my dark, cramped storage room, eating a cheap bowl of instant noodles. I watched Nathaniel's smug face on my primary monitor. On my secondary monitor, I opened a black command terminal. The Genesis flaw had been dormant for 2 years, hiding deep within the base code of the Apex upgrade that Nathaniel was about to push to millions of devices. He thought he was deploying a revolutionary update. He didn't, and Apos. Tino, he was deploying the detonator. I typed a sequence of 64 cryptographic characters, a master key that only existed in my head. I looked at the screen, my finger hovering over the enter key. I thought about the cold concrete of the subway station. I thought about Sarah dropping my ring on the marble floor. I thought about the 10 years of my life they had stolen. Your part is finally done, Nate, I whispered to the empty room. I pressed enter. The digital payload launched silently into the ether. The execution had begun. The countdown to midnight was a global spectacle. Nathaniel was hosting a lavish, Gatsby-esque launch party in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline. The room was packed with billionaires, senators, and A-list celebrities. Champagne flowed like water. At the center of the room, a massive digital clock counted down the final seconds until the Apex upgrade went live. Sarah stood beside him, draped in diamonds, smiling for the flashing cameras of the press. 3, 2, 1. The crowd erupted into cheers. Nathaniel pressed a ceremonial button on a sleek podium, supposedly signaling the central servers to push the update to millions of Aegis biosensors worldwide. For exactly 60 seconds, nothing happened. The champagne continued to pour. Then, the music abruptly cut out. Every single massive television screen in the penthouse, which had been displaying the climbing Aegis stock ticker, violently flickered and went black. A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. Suddenly, the screens flared back to life, but they weren't, and Apos. Showing the stock price. They were displaying a stark, blood-red background. In the center of every screen, in bold, white, unmistakable text, a single line of code appeared. Critical error. Genesis protocol activated. Unauthorized host detected. System lockdown initiated. Nathaniel's smile froze. He tapped the microphone. Just a minor display glitch, ladies and gentlemen, he laughed nervously. The tech team is handling it. But it wasn't an Apos. A display glitch. My phone, sitting on the dusty table in my storage room, began intercepting the panicked internal communications of the Aegis engineering team. The Genesis flaw had not just crashed the update. It had executed a catastrophic, systemic bricking of the entire Aegis infrastructure. Every single biosensor in the world simultaneously locked its proprietary data streams. I had designed it so it wouldn't oppose harm any patients. Hospitals simply lost the advanced predictive AI and had to rely on standard monitoring, but the multi-billion-dollar commercial functionality of the product vanished in an instant. Within 5 minutes, Nathaniel's cell phone began to ring, then Sarah's, then the phones of every corporate executive in the room. The military was calling. The Department of Defense was locked out. The global healthcare grid was rejecting the Aegis hardware as a compromised, hostile foreign entity. The crown jewel of modern medicine had just turned into millions of useless, microscopic paperweights. The next morning, the financial world woke up to an apocalypse. When the New York Stock Exchange opened at 9:30 a.m., the panic was visceral. The news of the global Aegis blackout had dominated the midnight news cycle. Investors were terrified. Within the first 3 minutes of trading, Aegis stock plummeted 40%. Nathaniel was barricaded in the corporate headquarters, sweating through his expensive shirt, screaming at his lead engineers. Through my backdoor access to their security cameras, I watched him throw a coffee mug across the server room, shattering it against the glass wall. "Fix it," Nathaniel roared, grabbing the chief engineer by the collar. "Revert to the old backup. Patch the firmware. Do something. We can and oppose." The engineer screamed back, terrified. "The lockdown didn't and oppose. Come from the outside. It and oppose. Buried in the foundational architecture. Every time we try to bypass the Genesis code, it actively encrypts the servers faster. Sir, this ISN and oppose. A hack. The system is functioning exactly as it was built to." Nathaniel let go of the engineer. The color completely drained from his face as a horrifying realization hit him. Built to. He remembered the genius orphan he had left to starve on the streets. But Nathaniel didn't and oppose. Have time to process the ghost of his past. The stock market was merciless. By noon, institutional investors dumped their massive holdings. The stock dropped another 30%. The trading of Aegis was officially halted by the SEC to prevent a total market panic. But the damage was done. While Nathaniel was losing billions by the hour, I was sitting in my dark room, watching my offshore accounts explode. My massive short positions were triggering. As the value of Aegis collapsed into dust, the financial vacuum I had built activated. Millions, then tens of millions, then hundreds of millions of dollars flooded into my anonymous, untraceable crypto wallets. I had walked into the electronics shop with nothing. By 4 p.m. that afternoon, I was a liquid billionaire. By nightfall, the Aegis corporate empire was a burning ruin. Nathaniel and Sarah fled the chaos of the city, retreating to their heavily fortified mansion in the Hollywood Hills. They thought they could hide from the media, the furious military generals, and the panicked board of directors. They couldn't and oppose. Hide from me. Through the mansion's internal microphones, I listened to the walls of their fraudulent relationship finally cave in. The stress of losing their billionaire status in less than 24 hours stripped away all their fake affection. Nathaniel paced the living room, pouring himself his 5th glass of scotch. And quote, "It was him," and quote. Nathaniel muttered frantically. And quote, "It was Elias. He planted a logic bomb in the code before we fired him." And quote. "That and oppose? Impossible." And quote. Sarah snapped, her voice shrill with panic. And quote. "He and oppose. Homeless. He doesn't and oppose. Have a laptop, let alone the resources to crash a global network." And quote. "Then who else?" And quote. Nathaniel screamed, hurling his glass into the fireplace. Desperate to save whatever wealth he had left, Nathaniel ran to his home office to wire his personal funds to a non-extradition country. He opened his laptop and logged into his private accounts. He found nothing. I had been waiting for this moment. Using the backdoors I established during my and quote, penetration test and quote, I had an oppose. Just secured the corporate servers. I had mapped their personal finances. Before the stock market even opened, I had anonymously leaked the undeniable proof of Sarah's secret embezzlement to Nathaniel and Apos. Private email. I watched through the webcam as Nathaniel opened the email. He saw the offshore routing numbers. He saw the millions of dollars Sarah had been quietly stealing from him for the past year. He stormed out of the office, his face twisted in a murderous rage. He found Sarah in the master bedroom, frantically packing a suitcase with designer jewelry. She was preparing to abandon him. End quote. "You parasitic bitch." End quote. Nathaniel roared, grabbing her arm. End quote. "You and Apos. V been stealing from me? While I was fighting to keep this company afloat, you were bleeding me dry." End quote. End quote. "Let go of me." End quote. Sarah shrieked, fighting back like a cornered rat. End quote. "You stole the company from Elias. You think I was ever going to trust a thief? I knew you and Apos. D dragged me down with you." End quote. They screamed, they cursed, they tore each other apart. The golden couple of Silicon Valley had degenerated into two desperate criminals fighting over the scraps of a sinking ship. But their argument was interrupted by the blinding glare of red and blue police lights flooding through the bedroom windows. I hadn't an Apos. T just leaked Sarah and Apos' embezzlement to Nathaniel. I had sent a comprehensive, heavily encrypted data dump to the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. The package contained irrefutable proof of their original corporate fraud. The forged documents, the deceptive equity transfers, the emails proving they conspired to defraud me of my intellectual property, and detailed ledgers of Nathaniel using corporate funds for illegal personal expenses. The FBI didn't and Apos, Tinoch. They breached the front gates of the Hollywood mansion. Nathaniel and Sarah were dragged out of their home in handcuffs, humiliated on live television, facing decades in federal prison for massive corporate fraud and wire tampering. Meanwhile, trading on Aegis stock resumed the next morning. It was a bloodbath, plummeted to pennies. The company was officially valued at less than the office furniture in its headquarters. It was time to reclaim my child. Using my massive, newly acquired dark web fortune, I deployed a swarm of legal proxy firms on Wall Street. I didn't in Apos, buy the company in my own name. Through a dozen anonymous shell corporations, I aggressively bought up every single dumped share of Aegis on the open market. Within 48 hours, I had legally purchased 85% of the outstanding shares for absolute fractions of a cent. I was no longer just the inventor of the Aegis protocol. I was the absolute, undisputed majority shareholder. I owned the board. I owned the patents. I owned the buildings. I had bought my billion-dollar company back for the price of a used car. The federal judges offered Nathaniel and Sarah a temporary bail hearing, allowing them to return to Chicago under heavy restrictions to cooperate with the corporate transition. The company was in receivership, and an emergency board meeting had been called by the mysterious new majority shareholder who had bought out the firm. Nathaniel and Sarah sat at the far end of the massive mahogany table in the Aegis boardroom. They looked destroyed. Nathaniel's tailored suit hung loosely on his depleted frame. Sarah's hair was unkempt, her eyes hollow and dark. They were entirely broken, waiting to surrender the keys of the kingdom to whatever ruthless vulture capitalist had bought their ruined empire. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom opened. The room fell dead silent. I walked in. I was Nanapos, wearing a lab coat, and I was Nanapos, wearing the ragged clothes of a homeless man. I wore a bespoke, midnight blue suit tailored to perfection. I was clean-shaven, my posture straight, and my eyes as cold and unforgiving as a winter storm. Nathaniel gasped, physically recoiling in his leather chair. The blood completely drained from Sarah's face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Hello, Nate," I said smoothly, walking to the head of the table and taking the CEO's chair. I looked at the woman who had dropped my engagement ring on the floor. "Sarah, you look tired." "Elias?" Nathaniel choked out, his voice trembling violently. How are you here? You have nothing." "I have everything," I corrected him, sliding a thick stack of legal documents across the table. "I am the proxy buyer. I am the architect of the Genesis flaw. And as of this morning, I am the legal owner of 85% of this corporation. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table, watching the sheer, agonizing horror wash over their faces as they realized the magnitude of my vengeance. They hadn't an oppose. T just lost to a random market crash. They had been systematically hunted, outsmarted, and decimated by the very man they had discarded in the gutter. "You stole my dream, Nathaniel," I said, my voice echoing in the silent boardroom. "You took my life and Oppo's work. You took my home. You threw me onto the concrete and expected me to die." I stood up, adjusting my cuffs. "But you forgot one fundamental truth about orphans, Nate," I whispered, my eyes locking onto his terrified gaze. "We know how to survive in the dark. And when we come back into the light, we take everything." The silence in the boardroom was absolute, heavy with the suffocating weight of total defeat. Nathaniel's hands trembled so violently, he had to grip the edge of the mahogany table to keep from collapsing out of his chair. Sarah was weeping, her tears ruining her expensive makeup, leaving dark, jagged streaks down her pale cheeks. They were looking at a ghost who had returned as a god. "You set us up," Nathaniel whispered, his voice hoarse, his mind finally piecing together the invisible labyrinth I had trapped them in. The short positions, the leaked emails, the dark web hacker. It was you. All of it. I merely exposed the rot that was already there. "Nate," I replied, my voice calm and completely devoid of pity. "You built a glass castle on a foundation of theft. All I did was throw the first stone." I signaled to the phalanx of corporate attorneys standing behind me. One of them stepped forward and placed 2 thick, legal binders in front of Nathaniel and Sarah. "These are your final separation agreements," I stated, tapping the heavy paper. "By signing these, you officially confess to the initial corporate fraud, waive any right to legal contest against my acquisition, and surrender the remaining fractions of equity you hold in this company. In exchange, the corporation will not pursue a separate, multi-billion-dollar civil suit against you on top of your impending federal criminal trials." Sarah looked up, her emerald eyes desperately searching mine for the naive, loving boy she had manipulated years ago. "Eli, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "I was terrified of him. Nathaniel forced me to do it. He said he would ruin me if I didn't in Oppos. T help him steal your patents. I still love you. We can start over." It was a pathetic, transparent performance. I leaned closer, looking into the eyes of the woman I had once wanted to marry. "The tragic thing, Sarah, is that if you had just been honest with me, I would have given you the world willingly. But you chose to steal it, sign the papers. Knowing they had absolutely no leverage, no money, and no future, they picked up the pens. With trembling, defeated hands, they signed away their lives. The empire was officially mine again. With the parasites excised from the corporate body, it was time to heal the world they had broken. I left the boardroom and walked down to the secure underground laboratory. The biometric scanners, now reprogrammed with my master credentials, flashed green as I approached. I stepped into the massive, sterile room where I had spent a decade of my life building the Aegis protocol. The room was filled with terrified engineers desperately trying to reverse engineer the Genesis flaw. When they saw me walk in, the legendary founder who had supposedly been cast out, they froze. "Step away from the terminals," I ordered gently. I walked up to the central mainframe. I didn't and Oppos. T need to consult a manual or look at a secondary screen. The architecture of the system was etched into my DNA. I pulled up the black command terminal. The red warning screens that were terrifying the global medical community reflected in my eyes. I typed the 64-character decryption key. I followed it with a new, optimized patch that not only removed the Genesis flaw lockdown but also significantly streamlined the biosensors and Oppos predictive algorithms. I hit enter. Around the world, millions of red screens instantly shifted to a calm, glowing blue. The military networks reconnected. The hospital mainframes synced. The Aegis protocol was back online, running faster, smarter, and safer than it ever had under Nathaniel's corrupted leadership. The media narrative shifted overnight. I wasn't an Oppos. T just the returning founder. I was the genius savior who had swooped in to fix the catastrophic technical failures of the previous, fraudulent administration. Aegis stock, which I had bought for pennies, skyrocketed. Within a week, my net worth eclipsed $20 billion. But the money didn't and oppose matter. What mattered was my first executive order as the reinstated CEO. I slashed the commercial price of the Aegis biosensors by 80%, ensuring that even the most impoverished clinics in the country could afford the preventative technology. The dream was finally real. The wheels of federal justice turned slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. 6 months later, I sat in the back row of a federal courtroom in downtown Chicago. The room was packed with journalists. Nathaniel and Sarah were sitting at the defense table. They looked nothing like the golden couple of Silicon Valley. Nathaniel was gaunt, his arrogance entirely beaten out of him by months in a holding cell. Sarah sat rigidly, refusing to even look at the man she had conspired with. During the trial, their defense strategies had consisted entirely of blaming each other, airing their most toxic, sociopathic secrets to the world. The judge, an unforgiving, no-nonsense woman, looked down at them from the bench. Nathaniel Sterling and Sarah Hayes, the judge began, her voice echoing in the silent room. In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case of corporate fraud so deeply malicious, so thoroughly calculated, and so completely devoid of human empathy. You did not just steal intellectual property. You attempted to destroy the life of the man who created it out of pure, unadulterated greed. The judge adjusted her glasses. For the charges of wire fraud, massive corporate embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy, I sentence you both to 25 years in a federal penitentiary, without the possibility of early parole. A collective gasp echoed in the gallery. Sarah collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Nathaniel didn't and oppose move. He just stared blankly at the wooden table in front of him, the realization of a life spent in a concrete box finally crushing the last of his spirit. As the bailiffs moved in to handcuff them, Nathaniel turned his head. His hollow, dead eyes met mine across the crowded courtroom. I didn't oppose smile. I didn't oppose gloat. I simply held his gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked out of the courtroom, stepping out into the bright, warm sunlight of the city. A year later, I made a single, final visit to the maximum security federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. I sat in the sterile, fluorescent-lit visitor and oppose room. On the other side of the thick, bulletproof glass sat Nathaniel Sterling, wearing a faded orange jumpsuit. He looked 10 years older, his hair graying at the temples, his posture slouched. He picked up the heavy plastic telephone. I picked up mine. "Why did you come, Eli?" Nathaniel asked, his voice raspy. "Come to see the animal in the cage?" "I came for closure, Nate," I replied, my voice steady. "I came to ask you a single question. Was it worth it? For a few months of fake glory, was it worth this?" Nathaniel looked down at his chained hands. He let out a dry, bitter laugh. "You want the truth? The hardest part wasn't an oppose the FBI raid. It wasn't an oppose the bankruptcy. It an oppose sitting in this cell every night, realizing that if I had just been a decent friend to you, I would have legally made billions anyway. You would have gladly shared it. My own greed was a disease. It blinded me to the fact that I already had everything I wanted." He looked up at me, tears welling in his tired eyes. "You beat me, Eli. You beat me because I thought money was power. I didn't and oppose realized that true power is having a mind they can and oppose take away." "Goodbye, Nathaniel," I said softly. I hung up the phone. "I didn't and oppose looked back as I walked out of the prison. The heavy steel doors slammed shut behind me, forever locking the ghosts of my past inside. I returned to Chicago on my private jet, flying over the city that had once tried to freeze me to death on a subway bench. I directed my driver to a quiet, modest cemetery on the outskirts of the city. I walked through the manicured grass until I reached a simple, elegant headstone. It belonged to my mother. I knelt down and placed a bouquet of fresh white lilies against the stone. "We did it, Mom," I whispered into the quiet evening air. No one else has to die in the dark. The Aegis Protocol had become the global standard for preventative medicine. Millions of lives were being saved every year because the sensors were catching diseases before they could become fatal. And because I owned the company outright, no greedy board of directors could ever artificially inflate the prices. I had established the Thorn Foundation, pouring billions into building free diagnostic clinics in impoverished neighborhoods across the globe. I stood up, the cool evening breeze brushing against my face. I had been dragged through the absolute depths of human betrayal. I had seen the people I loved most turn into monsters for the sake of $1. But the fire that was meant to burn me to ashes had forged me into iron instead. I walked back to the waiting car, the city lights beginning to glow in the distance. The orphan who had been thrown onto the concrete had built an empire that would outlast them all. The past was finally dead, and the future belonged to the architect.
Trembling ground, but I hear freedom's roaring sound. Your towers crack beneath our song. The weak turn strong, the right turns wrong. You sold control with silver tongues. Now feel the wrath of mortal drums. This is rebellion.